Hi, I'm Cameron.
And I'm Hayden.
And this is
Until the End of Crime. So Cameron, today you really lucked out.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask you any personal questions. I'm not going to ask about your romantic life or anything like that. Instead, I think I want you to help me understand, what role do communities play in the potential retrieval of a missing person?
Communities they're kind of the first on the ground, right? They're the ones that are spreading the word that somebody is missing. They are the ones that are going out and looking for them, assuming that the community feels connected. They're the ones who are helping to support the family of a missing person. They do the phone tree thing. They bring food and help provide support for that person through a difficult time. They're kind of the first line of defense.
Yeah.
Because the more of the community members that are involved in the missing person situation, the more boots on the ground you have, the more eyes you have, the more ears you have, the more information you have, maybe from somebody who might know something about the circumstances surrounding a disappearance.
I'm really glad you say that, because that's going to be a big part of today's case. I think also one of the things that became really clear to me as I was researching this case is that oftentimes, a missing persons case, a cold case, can go unnoticed if not for community involvement. If people don't care, if people are not speaking on behalf of the victim or the victim's family, they can get lost in the shuffle. There are crimes that are more easily solvable that come up, and of course, they take attention from cases that are just as worthy, but no longer sit in the front of their mind.
Yeah, that also makes me think that sometimes when you notice that somebody is missing, say from your personal life, say Andrew didn't come home, and you go and try to do a missing persons report, sometimes you might be met with a dispatcher or somebody at the station who says, well, he's an adult, he's allowed to go missing if he wants to, and then you lose valuable time in a situation where you know something is wrong, but that they're not able to, or they're not willing to allocate resources to helping you during a critical period of time after you've realized that, like, he was missing.
And unfortunately, that's something we're going to be dealing with today again. If that happened to me, if Andrew did not come home and I couldn't get a hold of him, I didn't know where he was, and I went to file a missing persons report and they tried to shove me off, I'm calling Belinda, and you can deal with her. I might not, but Belinda will sit there in your office until you arrest her. So, and even then she's going to be screaming from behind the bars. There is incorrigible.
I think also, sure, call somebody who is going to drive an hour to get there. But in the meantime, I want them to show me where that is actual written policy.
Right. I'm going to say something that I'm reticent to say, but show me a police officer that cares about policy, right? Like, I don't know. They zoom past me on the fucking highway when I'm already going 5 miles over.
Right.
So do they actually care what's in the book? Obviously, that's not fair to all police officers, right? But the truth of the matter is that I do think a lot of times that when you're in a position of power, you think that you can interpret the rules however you want.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is that the law does not exist for you to interpret it. The law exists for you to follow it.
And enforce it if that's the case.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. January 10th, 2002, a Thursday, began quietly for the Cooke family. It felt like any other morning in the tranquil Georgetown subdivision just outside of Austin, Texas.
Not Georgetown.
Listen, the way they I'm going to talk about this later. But
is this Rachel Cooke?
This is Rachel Cooke. Yeah. So you know exactly what case I'm telling you today.
She went for a run.
Yeah. But the way this episode of Disappeared, as I was watching it, talked about Georgetown, they acted like it was Three Rivers. In this small town, in this small community where everyone knows each other.
I think, to be fair, in 2002, that was possible.
You know their population in 2002?
Yeah.
Just under 34,000 people. Just under. It was like 33.7. And I was like, that's not a town anymore. It's a small city.
Yeah.
Not a town. Not a small town. Not everyone knows everyone. That's impossible. It's crazy town. And then I was like, you know what? You're in Georgetown. You're surrounded by other communities. If we call you the Austin Metroplex, we're talking 2 million plus people people in 2002. And so, sorry, you're not small town.
I do think that there, in 2002, it was still differentiated between where Round Rock ended and where Georgetown began.
Sure,
So
that's probably true.
because Georgetown still does have a lot of open areas and stuff. I used to go help out a friend of the family's mom after they moved out of Texas. I would go to Georgetown and I would set up her meds for the week so that she would take the right amount of meds on the right days and whatnot.
That was saintly of you. One of my new coworkers said, I can't tell if you're being serious or not. Like, I don't know if you're being sarcastic. I was like, I'm always very genuine. But no, I hear that a lot. I used to hear that from students. I can't tell if you're being serious or not.
Yeah, I think for you, it is usually that you're being genuine and it's just a ridiculous thing that you're being genuine about.
Yeah, I say something that sounds crazy, but I mean it.
And for me, it's always best to err on the side of sarcasm.
Yeah.
And jest.
You know, that's, oh God, what? Andrew and I were watching something this last week and God, it was probably with a drag queen. But, Aja said it during the extended little interview with Entertainment Weekly. And
Joey Nolfi watched it yesterday.
Okay. She has a moment where she says, if you like it, I love it. And to me, that resonated so hard because I love that for you. But if you like it, I love it, like party. That's going to be my new catchphrase. So thanks, Aja. I love it. We better get started. We better start whipping through this.
All right.
Rachel Louise Cooke was 19 years old, sleeping soundly on her parents' living room couch. Meanwhile, her family started their typical weekday routines. Robert, her father, who was a software engineer, Janet, her mother, an art teacher, and her sister Joanne, her younger sister, to be clear, all gathered around the breakfast table. Rachel had come home to Georgetown for the holidays, traveling from San Diego, California, where she had moved to pursue her independence and dreams in a city almost 100 times larger than her hometown. Her parents, Robert and Janet Cooke, had worried deeply about Rachel's move to San Diego. One of the things that Robert himself kind of discusses is him and Janet had a real fear of the crime rate in San Diego, which was roughly 373 violent crimes to every 100,000 people, whereas in Georgetown, it was less than 200 crimes total, violent, property, everything per 100,000 people. So a significant difference, but not quite as drastic as I think maybe they felt it was at the time.
It makes me think of Scrubs. There's an episode of Scrubs where I think it's Dr. Cox who says the statistic means nothing to the individual because we all know somebody who's come in and they've had this illness where there's a 5% survival rate and they survive. And then we've also known somebody who's come in and they've had a 90% survival rate and they don't survive. And so the statistic doesn't matter to the individual because that 10%, that 5% comes from somewhere.
Yeah, someone's got to be the exception. Tragically, the relative safety of what Rachel's described quiet Texas hometown offered gave her no protection against whatever awaited Rachel that January morning. Before she disappeared, Rachel was just a vibrant young woman at a crossroads in her life. She was staying home longer than she initially planned because her cousin was getting married. And so she was still in Georgetown after most people would have returned back to their campus. One of the things that I also was kind of uncertain about is I don't know if Rachel was still going to maybe the college or university she had been, because her sister kind of talks about how Rachel's new plan had become to go to fashion school. And it might have been her mother that said that, but one of them talked about how when Rachel returned, she would be doing fashion school instead.
So maybe she was going to a different college within the university?
I don't know. It sounded very different. Like there was a stark contrast between where she had been and what was coming, but I can't say that for sure.
Well, there was a stark contrast between me starting in the College of Natural Sciences and ending up in the College of Liberal Arts, I'll tell you that.
Her friends and family knew Rachel for her distinct fashion sense. She was a self-proclaimed fashionista, someone who expressed herself boldly through clothes, makeup, and hairstyle. What I really appreciate appreciated about this episode of Disappeared is they did such a good job of telling us Rachel's story and showing us who Rachel was through photography. So between herself and her family, there are all of these pictures of Rachel where she kind of epitomized the early 2000s, late 90s style. There was a picture where she had her hair, where it was...
There better be butterfly clip.
They weren't butterfly clips, but they were some kind of clips. And they were pieced throughout her hair, where it was like several little ones all in a row. And her best friend Shannon, who was interviewed for this docu-episode, had the hair that was like turned into little buns, but scattered throughout. It was very Spice Girls. And
Gwen Stefani.
Yeah. And so another image that like really stuck with me is that in one picture, Rachel was wearing this like striking magenta leopard print coat. And it's something that you wouldn't necessarily ever imagine would have turned into an article of clothing, but she wore it so well. You could just tell she felt so confident in that attire. And she also had paired it with a puka shell necklace. So it was something about it felt so nostalgic, but it also really helped me kind of understand the fact that we're talking about a person. And so it was, which, you know, most series do that, but victims don't always feel so close to what you know. But
yeah, I would disagree that a lot of times series don't effectively convey the humanness of a victim. They just become a victim. And are we also guilty of that on this podcast? Probably so.
Do we propagate that idea? Sure.
I imagine that we do. Yeah.
She also had her hair parted right directly in the middle. So now that center parts are back, and her hair was kind of framed by these really striking highlights, like
Kelly Clarkson.
Yes, but chunkier. I felt like I really knew her. I feel like she could have been one of my sister's friends in high school.
She could have been, right? If she was 19 in 2002.
Yeah. She also kind of had that kind of like wispy blue eyeshadow and the very thin eyebrows. So she just overall felt like someone that I could have known. She also had a really beautiful smile that I think really conveyed a warmth to her personhood. So the pictures her family took, the pictures she took, Disappeared including them, really was such a good choice. And it gave her so much humanity. And it really made me feel invested from the very start, because it's easy for me to check out and zone out. I was not doing that during Rachel Cooke's case. Rachel's mother, Janet, also shared this really cute anecdote that Rachel had a habit of going to everybody saying, well, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? What should I wear? And she followed that with, quote, she was asking everyone's opinion on which one, but of course she would wear the one she wanted anyway, but she always asked. Joanne, Rachel's sister, affectionately remembered Rachel's expensive taste and recalled how Rachel debuted a new tan sweater with this ornate beadwork at Christmas, and shared with her how, yeah, I paid $400 for this sweater, but isn't it cute? That's my kind of girly pop.
I have been there before in my younger years. I cared about fashion when I was younger, and I can remember justifying to myself that it was okay to spend like $165 on a pair of jeans because of the way that they were distressed, and they had this colorful embroidery under the places where it was distressed with some perfectly placed rhinestones. And yeah, no, 36-year-old Cameron, absolutely not. That I can make that for $20. Settle down.
I don't think I ever knew Cameron that had rhinestone embellishments on her jeans.
I think what you were going to say is you've never known me to care about fashion.
No, that's not totally true.
That is not true. When I started teaching, I still dressed kind of cute, not in my later years of teaching.
1X shoes.
Okay, those are just... But I used to, like... I had a couple little blazers that I would wear.
Yeah. I remember those.
Wedges that I wore to teach. Never.
It's crazy town. Rachel's childhood friend Shannon, who I already mentioned, really described Rachel with a kind of heartfelt affection. She really emphasized how kind Rachel was to everyone and how kind of charismatic and magnetic her personality was. And she was the kind of person that everyone gravitated towards. And it made me think of the podcast that has that title, the Never Light Up a Room. And I was like, damn, never light up a room. Don't be jovial. Don't be likable. Don't be charismatic.
I'm really killing the game.
You're safe. Rachel's boyfriend at the time, Greg, had visited Georgetown that Christmas with Rachel. He was well liked by Rachel's parents. They seemed to really dig Greg. And Rachel even confided in her sister that she thought that Greg was the one. And I know 19 is really young to think you have the one, but that's also not unfamiliar to Southern women, or maybe even women in general. On January 10th, after finishing breakfast, Robert Cooke left the Cooke home first, heading out for his day. And soon after, Janet and Joanne also departed together. They both kind of attempted to say goodbye to Rachel, but like most college kids who are home for a break, they're not waking up for anything. And so Rachel kind of mumbled like, oh, goodbye, and they were out the door. About an hour later, Rachel actually woke up, prompted by a phone call from Greg. She informed him of her plan to go for a morning run. And this
Wasn't he in California?
Yeah.
What time was this?
I don't know, but he called her.
But it's 2 hours behind in California.
Okay, so he woke up at 7 something.
Oh my gosh.
So she told him that she was going to do her normal thing, which was go for a run. Anywhere from 4 to 6 miles was her typical routine.
That's relatable.
Yeah. Rachel was also kind of an experienced and competitive runner. In high school, she had done cross country and long distance track, and it was kind of a passion for her. It was her sport, and it was a part of her daily routine. With headphones likely attached to her portable radio, Rachel headed out on a familiar route she had traversed countless times since childhood.
A Walkman, wasn't it?
Probably, but it didn't say
2002?
specifically. Her parents' home sat within a subdivision where houses rested on these really spacious lots. Most of them were at least an acre. So there was distance between all of the homes in this subdivision. During the week, most of those roads in the subdivision stayed pretty quiet. People weren't walking there, they weren't running there, they weren't driving there. It was all about their commute, right? So it's not like she was at some kind of busy neighborhood with busy roads. Rachel ran so much in her neighborhood that her parents said that she knew every bend, every mailbox, every landmark she was familiar with.
I always thought that she was in a more rural area than an acre apart. Because really, an acre is not that much when we're talking the distance between homes. The homes aren't on top of each other, but it's not that much. And I was always thinking that she was in a very unpopulated area.
I mean, the dramatization shots they used, which it could have been her real home, but I'm not sure. They seemed very far apart, like very spacious, but their actual words and the research conveyed that each home sat on at least 1 acre. So could have been more, but not less.
Okay.
And the actual like dramatization footage itself made it seem like, gosh, I don't even have anything to compare it to, but like maybe a football field between most homes. But I don't
American football, I assume.
Yeah, I don't know how long a soccer field is. Several hours later, Robert would be the first to arrive home, quickly succeeded by Janet and Joanne. And as they all returned home, they made note that there was no sign of Rachel. The house was exactly as it had been earlier that day when they all left, and there was no evidence that Rachel had returned home from her run. Later on, her parents and sister would go on to describe how they figured out that Rachel was out on a run, which was that she was very meticulous about how she laid out her clothing, and the only thing that was missing was her running outfit and her running shoes. And so they kind of immediately pieced together that Rachel had gone for a run and never returned back home. By all accounts, the well-loved and vibrant Rachel Cooke had vanished into thin air, leaving behind no real trace of where she might be.
Was there any amount of them showing up and thinking that she was still out running, or did they know that she would go running in the morning or the early afternoon and that she would have ordinarily been back at the house by the time they got there?
It seems like they were pretty much like automatically disconcerted by her not being there. So here's what really set it off, right? Here's what made them panic. And I think I talk about it a little bit later. But when they get home, so not only do they notice that it's just her running clothes that are missing, her cell phone is there, her purse is there, all of her personal belongings, and then her bestie Shannon, and this is why we love best friends.
Her makeup bag.
Yeah. She was like, Rachel wasn't going anywhere without her fucking makeup. Are you kidding me?
But if the only things that were missing were her running gear, would you not assume that she was running? That's, I guess, what I'm asking.
What did cell phones look like in 2002?
They were big. They were the Nokia block things. Where you
right,
could play
but they weren't
Snake
like
on
the
them.
ginormous enormous ones that had that big antenna and like looked like a regular phone in a bag.
No, they were Nokia.
Yeah.
Sienna.
Like the little Nokia with the antenna. Little one.
Sienna, include a picture of the Nokia. Yeah, the like hard antenna.
Yeah. You played Snake on it.
Yeah, I had one.
Yeah.
My dad got me one when I was 13, which would have been 2002.
Wow. And I don't know if maybe that was also a giveaway, but in 2002, were people even taking their cell phones? Listen, I don't know. I'm only reporting what I know.
You didn't take it everywhere because text messages were like brand new if they were a thing. You would accidentally open the web browser and you'd be like, get out of here because it would cost money. Sending a text message was like 10 cents. And then not everybody else had a cell phone, so having it was like carrying around a paperweight.
Yeah.
I mean, if nobody has a phone to contact you, you really only used it whenever people would typically be at home.
Right.
It wouldn't have been something you would have taken on a run by any stretch of the imagination, although, in retrospect, definitely should have.
So, after they noted that Rachel's personal belongings were all behind and that her running attire was the only thing missing, they did kind of devolve into significant worry. And Rachel's mother, Janet, called Wildfire, which was a local restaurant where Rachel would typically work when she was back in town. Are you familiar with Wildfire? I wanted to know that as I was watching this.
I'm not. I'm just familiar with the fact that Rachel would pick up shifts whenever she would return to Georgetown.
Yeah. Well, when Janet called Wildfire, they were like, yeah, Rachel was here today. She worked. She was covering for somebody, which made them feel like, oh, okay, good. Like Rachel, I don't know what the fuck she's doing, but at least she's safe. Like she worked her shift today. She had a shift.
But that was the day before, wasn't it?
That's not what's conveyed here. It's that she worked that day she went missing. So I know listen, it's not right, but I haven't gotten to telling you that it's not right yet. So
throw away my knowledge.
Rachel's family felt really secure. Like, okay, we don't know where Rachel is, but she worked today. She's okay. And
somebody has had eyes on her.
Yeah. And that's exactly what the person who answered at Wildfire said. They were like, yeah, Rachel was here. She was filling in for someone. She's fine. And they were reassured by this information. However, the following morning brought renewed panic. Rachel had still not returned home, and Rachel's family decided they would call Wildfire again. And this time the employee working clarified that the Rachel who had worked the previous evening was a different Rachel, not Rachel Cooke. At this point,
because you're probably not thinking about the Rachel who is only not even seasonal, but like sporadic.
Yeah.
And they're working there.
So at this point,
of course, because it was the 80s when she was born. So Rachel and Jessica and Ashley and Amanda, there are a lot of them.
There are a lot of Rachels, a lot of Amandas.
I know. I graduated with 3.
At this point, Rachel's family became dramatically concerned, and they were desperate for any kind of information, any kind of clues that would help them understand where Rachel was. What kind of dawned on them at this point, what they kind of realized, was that Rachel went for a run and never got back home. They hadn't quite pieced that together yet, but after they found out she had not been at Wildfire the night before, that's when they said, okay, wow. So she went on a run and she was never back in this home.
And we've lost all this time.
Yes. Robert began driving his daughter's typical running route. It seemed like whatever way she ran, it was how she ran every time. And so he kind of slowly went by, scanning, looking for anything. He talks about looking for Rachel's body in the instance that she was hit by a car and left for dead, and also trying to see if he could spot anything of hers, right? The portable radio, any of her clothing items, anything that would give some kind of indication she'd been there. Janet, mom, she went to local hospitals and she began trying to see if there was a Jane Doe or someone who was there that they couldn't identify, or in the instance that Rachel couldn't remember who she was. And nothing came of that either. More than 24 hours had now passed since Rachel had gone out for her run, and no one had seen or heard anything from Rachel. This is when Robert and Janet decided to go to the Williamson County Sheriff's Department, which I was like, oh, weird. For some reason, I just thought Georgetown would also be Travis County, but
Wilco.
Yeah. And
Round Rock is also Williamson County, and I think Pflugerville might be as well.
Okay. So they went to the Williamson County Sheriff's Department and officially reported that their daughter was missing. On January 11th, Detective Larry Hawkins of the Williamson County Sheriff's Office described Rachel as a hometown girl known by everyone in the community. He also noted explicitly that their agency, along with neighboring agencies, had never encountered a case like this, because abductions in this area were unheard of. That was until Rachel went missing. As I was watching this, as I was listening to the family talk and the people who are a part of this community talk, I thought, man, like, it makes sense to me to think this way if you live around 1,800 people. But if you're in a community of 30,000 plus, I don't know if I could think this way. But Joanne is quoted as saying, nothing happens here. It's a small town. Everybody is friendly. You don't think something like that could happen to you. And
well, I think it's been established that I think that it could happen at any place at any time.
Anywhere, anytime, any place.
Mm-hmm. When they made this acknowledgement that this is an unfamiliar crime, what measures did they take to contact other agencies that it was more familiar to, or
nothing in the first 72 hours.
Great.
Nothing.
The first 72 hours after it was reported, or the first 72 hours after she went missing?
It wasn't until the fourth day that something happened. So fourth day of her going missing. So 72 hours after it was reported. So 72 hours elapsed from report to actual action. And no action happened so went missing on Thursday. Friday, parents report it. Police don't do anything. So Robert and Janet are like, we need to find our daughter. So they organize their friends and family to start a search. And they do. And lots of people they didn't even anticipate showing up. They're talking like hundreds of people searching for Rachel. And that search is ended because Williamson County Sheriff's Department finally decides to show themselves after the search has started on Saturday and disband the search and say, you can't do this. And I know that's because if there is a crime scene, they don't want it to be tampered with. But their inaction led Janet and Robert feeling like they didn't have any other choice.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately, on Sunday, enter the Texas Rangers. They decided, I guess, that they better call somebody because, and it's what really pisses me off is, what was the Williamson County Sheriff's Department going to do if they hadn't organized a search? If they hadn't had the community out there? Would they have waited till Monday? Would it have been business as usual? Their initial response to Robert in reporting is that, she's an adult. She probably went to Mexico with her boyfriend. Yep. Those were their exact words. Mexico with her boyfriend. And he was like, it was so discouraging because my wife and I knew that that's not something our daughter would do.
Right. And just for the record, this is who the media typically show out for.
These are the cases they take seriously.
Right. So I bet it was hella discouraging for these parents within this community that they felt safe and secure with raising a family there.
Right. Well, and it also was like they suggested, how do you know that your daughter just didn't like get wasted at a party and isn't back yet? And it was so dismissive, their response.
Because she disappeared in the late morning or early afternoon. Hello?
It was really heartbreaking to hear Janet talk about this situation because she recognizes that those first 72 hours are critical in a missing person's case. That's going to make or break what happens. And they didn't do anything.
And nothing was done, yeah.
And
the family had already lost time because they thought that she was at Wildfire. Did you research theories that we'll
about
get
what
into
happened
at the
to
end?
Rachel Cooke? There's a couple we'll discuss, but I didn't go to Reddit or Web Sleuths and look for any potential theories. So, do you have theories? Do you know theories?
I might have one theory, but just a theory of things that commonly happen that could apply to this case.
Okay, so that Saturday, when Rachel's family started their community search, Sheriff's Department came and shut it down. The next day, midday, Texas Rangers show up. In particular, a Texas Ranger named Matthew Lindeman. Why does that matter? Well, first, he's the Texas Ranger who's the spokesperson in the episode of Disappeared. But what's crazy is I was like, that name sounds so familiar to me. Why am I thinking I know Matthew Lindeman?
You're related.
No. Not that I know of, but I was like, I think that my old high school peer, Hannah, got married to a Lindeman, and I think she's posted about Matthew Lindeman. And so I went back and checked Instagram, and she posted, my father-in-law, Matthew Lindeman, is running for sheriff of Williamson County. And it was him. And I was like, oh, Hannah, I'm watching a docuseries episode right now, and I think this is your father-in-law, right? And she was like, yeah, that's him. But he is the person who was working the case for the Texas Rangers. And he arrived, and as soon as he arrived, they really started to take the search seriously, right? The Williamson County Sheriff's Department had the good foresight to say, oh, they're already doing community organizing. Maybe we need to call somebody else. And they did.
So he was a Texas Ranger and then was running for Wilco Sheriff?
Yeah, like a decade and a half later that he's running for sheriff after he was a Texas Ranger.
Yeah, it feels like a step down. But I guess Texas Rangers probably are dispatched all over the state of Texas, whereas a Williamson County Sheriff.
Also, being elected as a political figure comes with its own type of cachet, right? Like there is a certain, which I'm not saying anyone does it for power, but there is a certain something to being an elected official, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the elected officials that we've got going on right now.
Yep.
Over there, across the pond from where I'm at. Are they related? Who knows? Who's to say?
Yeah, who's to say? Janet Cooke expressed later that the officer from the sheriff's department that appeared on that Saturday seemed surprised, kind of skeptical about the large turnout of the community members searching for Rachel. And Janet herself did openly acknowledge that she felt that law enforcement hadn't done everything they could, but that she was understanding that they didn't want to contaminate or alter a potential crime scene. Still a roof.
Why were they skeptical of a large turnout?
I don't know, but she talks about how it seems like the officer that arrived seemed surprised by the number of people who were engaging in the search, and that it was as if they were feeling skeptical about it.
It just sounds to me like it's a lot of people who realize that this could have been our child. This could have been me. This could have been my sister. This could have been my granddaughter.
I don't know. I guess, to be fair, if something like that's never happened in your community and you haven't seen a turnout like that, I could see why it would be surprising. But skepticism, I don't know. By Sunday, January 13th, like I said, Matthew Lindeman, Texas Ranger, had been contacted by the Williamson County Sheriff's Office and was there that same day. And Matthew Lindeman really put Rachel's family not at ease, but kind of at comfort with the investigation.
Assured?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he shared that his exact words are pretty early on in the investigation, it was determined that it would be unlike Rachel's behavior just to go off and not tell anyone where she was. So it created suspicion. And Robert Cooke did take assurance in that. And he recalls that Lindeman communicated with him directly and said that he did not think that Rachel had gone anywhere voluntarily. For the Cooke family, it felt like they finally got to the right person. On that same Sunday, 4 days after Rachel had vanished, a new, massive organized search commenced, now including law enforcement agencies and a large number of civilian volunteers. Texas authorities mobilized every available resource: ATVs, horseback units, helicopters, and they called it an organization called EquiSearch. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, Texas EquiSearch.
Yeah, and they provided significant additional manpower. But despite this enormous and coordinated effort, by the day's end, there was no trace of Rachel to be found. Not an article of clothing, not a Walkman, nothing. While searches were underway, detectives faced their own difficult challenge, which was trying to put together Rachel's final moments. What was clearly established is this: Janet and Joanne Cooke had last saw Rachel at nearly 8 a.m. on Thursday morning, January 10th, as they left for school. Rachel's cell phone records did confirm that she had spoken with Greg in San Diego. That call ended at precisely 9:15 a.m. Authorities concluded that this was the last confirmed communication that Rachel made before her disappearance. Seeking additional clues, authorities canvassed Rachel's neighborhood. Soon, hope arose as multiple neighbors confirmed seeing Rachel on her run that morning. Two separate couples provided really credible sightings, clearly describing Rachel's clothing, her hairstyle, and the authorities found them to be accurate and reliable. Rachel had first been seen that morning at about 10 a.m. by one of the couples. Approximately 20 minutes later, that same couple saw Rachel once again as she continued her running circuit. So she had passed them one time, and on the way back, she passed them again. Another witness, a woman working in her yard, along with her daughter, stated clearly that they saw Rachel running towards the end of their cul-de-sac, and they kind of briefly exchanged greetings as Rachel had paused to do some stretching. But they communicated, everything was fine. The last known sighting of Rachel is at 10:45 a.m. from another couple. They were actually, I believe, the closest neighbors to the Cooke house. And as the couple backed out of their driveway, they saw Rachel running behind them, and they recognized her immediately. At that moment in time, they noted that Rachel was headed in the direction of her parents' house, which was roughly 200 yards away from this sighting. Despite Rachel's close proximity to home, investigators found no evidence or indication that Rachel ever actually made it back into her parents' home. In fact, evidence in this case wasn't just sparse, it was non-existent. There's nothing. Matthew Lindemann would later confirm that authorities were forced to operate under the assumption that Rachel had been abducted during her morning run within her own neighborhood. Yet, despite authorities' confidence in this scenario, Rachel's family found little comfort in this conclusion, especially in the stark absence of any kind of physical evidence or a crime scene. The days for Rachel's family began passing more quickly and more painfully than the days before. Shannon Leach, her friend, recalled clearly how difficult this period was for Rachel's family, explicitly noting they were a wreck, both just in tears, not knowing what was going on or what had happened to Rachel. As the hours and days continued to tick by, no answers, Rachel's disappearance stood out as an increasingly perplexing case. A likely crime committed without any identifiable crime scene. It didn't take long for news of Rachel's case to spread across Central Texas, and the initial momentum of the official search gradually waned. However, hundreds of dedicated volunteers continued to rally around the Cooke family, and they were determined to find Rachel. Janet Cooke vividly recalls how these volunteers would return from searches, and they would appear emotionally drained, oftentimes tears visible in their eyes because they were so incredibly disappointed at their failure to locate Rachel or find any kind of evidence. One of the more endearing things that Janet shares is how heartening it was to see so many people so deeply impacted by Rachel's absence and how committed they were to finding her. And while she didn't say these words, to me it sounded a lot like through those actions she felt less isolated and less alone. People were showing up and trying so hard to find her daughter. And she said that was kind of one of the only things that kept her going, is knowing that other people were committed to finding Rachel too.
I imagine that you feel like no one else cares when they don't show up. And so them showing up and realizing that people care. It's not just you. You're not alone in this, that they're working alongside you. Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, it made me emotional while I was watching, and not just because Janet was emotional, but this idea that community can make such a difference in how you perceive the world, and you're standing in it. And so even though Rachel is just one person, her and her story were enough to get this community to give of themselves in a way that was purely intended to recover her. And that's like the beautiful part of humanity. And so it does get me a little emotional.
It makes me think about you and I worked at the same place, and you came at a time where community was really big. And so you felt like you were a part of something bigger than you, and like you mattered within that. And I did not feel that way. Things were not as community focused. We had a coworker who came on, and after 5 weeks of working there, she sobbed on her way to work because she said she felt like she did not matter when she walked in the building.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is I understand how lonely it can feel to be a part of something, but not to feel like you were a part of that thing.
Right. The power of community, the way it can kind of transcend feelings of loneliness and destitution, but its absence makes those feelings far worse.
Yeah.
Texas EquiSearch was also still a part of the search for Rachel, and they combed hundreds of square miles looking for any trace of evidence connected to Rachel's disappearance. Robert Cooke became driven.
I was going to ask if they also searched in any bodies of water.
They do. And I'll get to that in, I think, probably another 2 paragraphs.
It's kind of their thing, I think.
Yeah. Well, so they never talk about Texas EquiSearch searching bodies of water, but Williamson Williamson County investigating divers combed Lake Georgetown and found nothing. But we do go back to bodies of water years later again. But no one ever mentions Texas EquiSearch being a part of the bodies of water. Doesn't mean they're not. That's just not what was conveyed and what I was seeing. Robert, so driven by urgency and desperation, diligently turned over to the sheriff's department anything remotely suspicious that volunteers uncovered, really looking for clues where they weren't. And as media coverage grew, more and more tips began to come in, and they came in fast. Former Texas Ranger Matthew Lindeman recalled explicitly that there were hundreds of tips, if not thousands. Detective Larry Hawkins similarly emphasized the investigative intensity, noting that he personally interviewed hundreds of individuals, both as suspects and as witnesses. Early in the investigation, authorities pieced together a possible lead involving a suspicious white Camaro that had been reportedly seen in the neighborhood on the day of Rachel's disappearance. Investigators had been inundated by calls reporting this Camaro, so there is no dispute that this Camaro was in the neighborhood and was committing suspicious activity. And multiple callers confirmed that there were two young men inside this white Camaro, and that their kind of driving around their neighborhood was aimless. One report described seeing a jogger roughly Rachel's age near this vehicle, and another described seeing a young woman apparently struggling inside this vehicle. Lindeman stated that investigators poured significant resources into finding this Camaro, and they found several similar vehicles and examined all of them. But despite those exhaustive searches, authorities never uncovered any evidence linking Rachel to any of these vehicles. Ultimately, the two men who had been reportedly seen in the Camaro were identified. They were local teenagers skipping school, playing hooky, and
it's what I was thinking. I was in my head like, I could see teenagers, especially 16, 17, just driving around because, one, you don't actually understand the value of $1 and the cost of gasoline. And then I know in 2002 it was a lot lower, but still. And then that's just kind of a teenage thing, is to drive aimlessly around areas that it doesn't make sense. But like the number of times I, as a teenager, drove around the area by my intermediate school just for shits and gigs, like small town areas where you just drive around for the sake of driving around because you can. And because somebody else is footing the bill for the gasoline.
Nothing else to do.
Nothing to do.
Also, there is no group of people that is more innately suspicious behaving than teenagers. Everything they do seems so suspect. And so, right, like naturally it's teenagers just fucking around.
Because when you have more than one of them together, you know that they're getting into some harebrained schemes.
Yes.
You just know because their brains are not developed.
Right. Authorities conducted thorough background checks on both of these young men and meticulously swept the vehicle for DNA, and ultimately they were both cleared of anything to do with Rachel Cooke's disappearance. More weeks passed by without any kind of answers, and the sheriff's department divers turned their attention to Lake Georgetown. This lake was only a few miles from the Cooke household, and between Disappeared and the articles I read to kind of bolster my case, I still don't understand how they ended up at Lake Georgetown, or why it matters that they found stolen vehicles in Lake Georgetown, because they talk about that there were stolen vehicles, but there was no sign of Rachel Cooke and nothing that could be tied to her disappearance.
I mean, I guess stolen vehicle does imply crime.
Right.
And they believe that.
But if it has no bearing on Rachel Cooke's case, why the fuck do you have to tell me about it?
Well, they think that something criminal befell Rachel.
Right.
And so crime.
Yeah, but if you, like...
If crime is as infrequent as it has been made to seem, then you have to imagine for these people that all crime is just kind of lumped together.
Right.
If crime is just not that frequent, then any and all crimes are a big deal and are thrown into the same...
It just felt like a non sequitur. Like, why are you telling me this? If the cars don't have a fucking thing to do with Rachel Cooke's case, why are you wasting the breath like I am right now? now. I didn't have to bring them up. I didn't have to talk about it. I just decided I would. Okay. I mean, maybe, sure. Okay.
A vicious cycle of they don't relate, but somebody else told us about them. And so it's just carried on.
So now I have to bring it up.
So now you are, yeah.
Yeah.
Break the cycle, Hayden.
No. No, I'm not a cycle breaker. Tips involving unidentified men in the area were also seriously pursued. Police artists created composite sketches of potential. They were not good. They were not good. And that's coming from me.
You know I would rip them to shreds.
Right. You just fucking paper shredder those bitches because they were, one of them, I was like, why
had to be better than Madeline McCann.
Oh, yeah.
It was just an egg.
Has to be better than Madeline McCann. But it was one of these, I'm going to fucking call it a caricature despite it being a police sketch. It looked like the Screaming Man painting. Yeah. And I was like, who? No, this doesn't even make sense. Whatever. Police and authorities did a great job of distributing these sketches. They were out to media. They were everywhere you looked, but nothing came of them.
Well, hold on. Pause for the Full House theme song to play in my head.
Why?
Everywhere you look.
Oh.
Everywhere. I was just kidding. We don't have to pause right now.
Okay. With the investigation repeatedly hitting dead ends, investigators began to scrutinize the individuals who were already in Rachel's circle. First up was Rachel's boyfriend, Greg. Greg actually flew back from San Diego to Georgetown on the Sunday after Rachel vanished, eager to help in the search. And immediately upon arrival, investigators subjected Greg to rigorous questioning and administered a lie detector test. And despite phone records confirming his presence in San Diego at the time of Rachel's disappearance, they still subjected him to a polygraph. But investigators did rule Greg out very quickly after that polygraph. Next came Rachel's parents. Both Robert and Janet Cooke willingly participated in polygraph tests. Robert failed one question during his polygraph examination, and reflecting on his experience, Robert shared, "They asked me if I knew where Rachel was, and I said no. And unfortunately, I think I do. I think she's in heaven. I think that's why I didn't pass that question on the quiz." Lindemann later confirmed that authorities were able to clear many potential persons of interest during this time, yet many others remained unresolved. Among the individuals of lingering interest, and I don't know this person's name, was Rachel's ex-boyfriend. Joanne, Rachel's sister, immediately suspected him as being involved with Rachel's disappearance, recalling that during Rachel's visit home, she had gone to see him and reported back to her that the encounter had not gone smoothly, that he had in fact, quote, made a scene. Rachel revealed to Joanne only that her ex-boyfriend had, quote, made a scene, and Joanne believed strongly that this incident may have escalated into something more serious due to his previously volatile nature. Janet Cooke echoed these sentiments, explicitly describing Rachel's past relationship with her ex-boyfriend as, quote, fire and ice from the start. Janet recalled vividly how poorly he reacted when Rachel broke up with him, recounting specifically how during Rachel's previous visit home, he had shown up drunk at the Cooke home at 3 a.m, and Janet eventually had to run him off by threatening to call the sheriff's department. His desperation to remain part of Rachel's life was really clear, and no one still disputes that. Adding to this concern, Rachel encountered her ex-boyfriend during that Christmas break that she was home. Shannon Leach remembered hearing Rachel and her ex-boyfriend arguing at this gathering. Shannon saying that his words to Rachel at that party was kind of a threatening, "I can't live without you." And he expressed that he wanted to reconcile, believing that Rachel should be with him again. That incident took place only 2 days before Rachel disappeared.
I'm holding out because I'm assuming that you're going to tell me whether or not this person was cleared or whether or not they just don't have enough evidence.
Robert Cooke has shared, "I just don't know. Ex-boyfriends, ex-husbands are always someone you have to look at, but when you don't have any proof, you can't really call them a suspect." The first anniversary of Rachel Cooke's disappearance soon arrived and passed with no kind of resolution. And despite intensive and persistent efforts by law enforcement agencies and the community at large, investigators were no closer to uncovering the truth of what happened to Rachel. And unfortunately, hope began to fade. Rachel's sister Joanne grappled heavily with the realization of all the milestones that she would experience without her sister, and all of the ones that she would experience that her sister wouldn't experience herself. And As a sibling, I felt that as something so incredibly sad to think if something happened to my sister or my brother, all of the things that they wouldn't get to have or get to experience that I
Or that
will.
you wouldn't get to share with them.
Right. And God, I found that heartbreaking. And it's not something I'd ever thought of before. But hearing someone who actually experienced talking about that mourning of events not come to pass, I found it particularly harrowing.
I can tell that this case really hit you harder than other cases that you've
It did.
researched.
Yeah, this is one of the first cases where the people in the victim's life just really openly doted on them. And I'm not saying that other victims and their families didn't have the same kind of love, but hearing how they talk about her over and over again and referring to her, I don't think I've been this upset since I did Caleb Deal, because I also found that one really upsetting. I didn't find either of them as upsetting as your case last week, but still pretty upsetting. When you brought that darkness to the world.
When I shared that darkness. It's not entirely dark. Jenny's really amazing.
She is. Oh my God. What a real life heroine.
Her advocacy work, her sharing her story, her pursuit of higher education in order to understand, and I think to an extent her willingness to be the subject of research or of the understanding of others.
Between her and Mary Vincent, you've done some hard hitters.
I'll tell you about a strong survivor.
For Robert Cooke, the passage of a year after Rachel's disappearance meant very little to him other than just this idea of failure to find his daughter. And he came to believe that Rachel was abducted either in the very final stretch of her jog or perhaps just moments after she entered the Cooke home. One of the reasons he thinks this is this kind of self-admission that the Cooke family never locked their doors.
I was going to say, here's what I'm thinking, because originally my theory that I was going to share was about sex trafficking.
Yeah.
But with the ex-boyfriend, he would have known her routine. He would have known that she was somebody who went running. And so there's the possibility that him or someone else who did know her routine, that somebody could have known this information about her and about the family home, and they could have been lying in wait inside the home or immediately outside the home, or they could have waited until she entered and closed the door and then knocked and gone from there. But
talk about a soft target when your doors are just unlocked.
We've said it before. I'm going to say it again. Lock your doors.
Lock your fucking doors.
Okay.
Lock them up.
Wait, I've been meaning to bring this up, and now that we're having this conversation, I am remembering. What about during the daytime?
What do you mean?
I mean that during the daytime. Yeah, so I noticed that somebody in my life, and I don't think it's just one person, but somebody is very lax about locking their doors during the day.
Right. I know people that do that too.
So
honestly,
how do we feel?
Go to Three Rivers, Texas and try all the doorknobs and see what happens.
During the day. Don't do that. Do not do that.
Right.
Gun country.
Who's going there? They will exercise their Second Amendment right. Where I left off, the Cookes. Let me tell my story. You're going to piss off Sydney or
it's Stephanie.
Stephanie.
Sorry, Stephanie.
They felt very safe.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. # join the Patreon.
Now I'm going to listen.
They felt very safe in their country neighborhood. Eventually, the case does go cold, and it was deemed inactive by the Wilson County Sheriff's Department.
Or the Williamson County.
That one. And at this point in time, Rachel's family kind of undergoes a disheartening makeover. Joanne recalls that they all were trying to deal with the loss of Rachel in their own way, and that really caused a lot of tension within the family. Ultimately, Janet and Robert, who were united in all things related to Rachel, began to struggle with the rest of their relationship. Their shared grief, though deeply felt and uniting, had fractured in expression, and Janet longed for comfort, for love, to be hugged, and Robert's only focus was ensuring that nothing like this would ever happen again, and hopefully finding Rachel. Janet is quoted as saying that love just wasn't there anymore. As their divorce proceedings began, Robert threw himself further into the role of investigator and also served as kind of the media liaison between the family and the media. He gave interviews, he organized updates, he shared Rachel's story wherever he could, and he pressed for any traction that might keep the case alive. And it became his second job, so much so that he was actually laid off from his actual job. Joanne also struggled to keep up a regular life after the disappearance of her sister, and obviously that wasn't helped by her parents' marriage falling into disrepair. 2 years after Rachel's disappearance, a change came to the Williamson County Sheriff's Department. A new sheriff was elected, a new task force was assembled, and it was called the Rachel Cooke Task Force. This included detectives, Texas Rangers, the FBI, and the Austin Cold Case Unit. The belief of this group was strong. They were going to find Rachel, but as Robert later recounted, the task force found nothing new. And despite the pooled manpower and the investigative expertise, Rachel's case remained frozen in time. By 2006, the task force had been disbanded. And at this point, Detective Larry Hawkins inherited the case and all the records from the former investigators and the task force. Hawkins brought more than professional obligation to work. He has talked about how his own 3 daughters really drove his desire to solve this case because, like what you said earlier, it could be anyone's daughter. It could be anyone's family member. And that's a terrifying thing to reckon with when you're talking about the community that you live in. In August 2006, once again, there was a shift. In Gatesville, Texas, authorities received a prison letter. A convicted murderer had contacted them. He claimed that he was responsible for Rachel Cooke's disappearance. This prisoner's name was Michael Moore. He's been described by law enforcement as a career criminal, and he has been in and out of trouble, in and out of jail, in and out of prison since he was 13 years old. And much of his adult life was spent in prison. At the time of his confession, he was serving 4 life sentences for the 2003 robbery and murder of a young mother and her unborn child. With that kind of violent history, particularly one that includes murder, authorities took Moore's claims seriously. Both Detective Hawkins and Ranger Lindemann both interviewed him in prison. Moore's account was chilling. He claimed that he had been driving through Rachel's neighborhood looking for someone to rob when he saw her. He said he killed her, transported her body to several locations before ultimately dumping her remains in Matagorda Bay along the coast.
Looking for someone to rob, but came across her and was like, you know what? I guess murder is also fun too.
Murder's what I'm doing today now. No more robbing, no more taking, just murdering. Yeah.
The ultimate take.
Moore provided really detailed information, and he claimed that he had stopped Rachel mid-jog, killed her with a hammer.
Where?
I don't know. The details in Moore's account were plausible. He had not been incarcerated at the time of Rachel's disappearance, and he lived very close to the Cooke's family home. And at the time of the disappearance, a white pickup truck had been identified as a possible vehicle of interest. I've never heard that term, vehicle of interest, but love it.
Makes sense.
Moore, it turned out, drove a white pickup truck matching that description at this time. Janet Cooke actually remembers seeing this exact white truck, and it was the night after they first reported Rachel as missing. So after she was missing, but before law enforcement became involved, and she recalled that this white truck slowly drove past their house more than once. And it stood out to her because she felt like she recognized the vehicles in her neighborhood, but this one did not look familiar. And it drove suspiciously slowly.
After reported to the police?
They had already reported that she was missing, but it was before police had become actively involved. So literally that same Saturday.
So Friday, Saturday.
Well, Friday they reported it, and I believe it was the Saturday, because police still hadn't got involved. But that evening they saw that white truck.
But if it was Friday, it would make a little bit more sense because Friday was the day that there wouldn't have been as much uncommon traffic because
Right.
Saturday was when everybody showed up. So
It was
then
night.
You could chalk it up to somebody who was out searching still, who was still trying to be a part of, in theory, if you're...
I'm unsure of the exact day, but this is what's reported.
It would be far more suspicious to me if it was Friday, but I'm not saying that it's not suspicious on Saturday.
So after After Michael Moore, authorities finally believed they had some kind of breakthrough. This man was serving 4 life sentences for a double murder. He was able to provide details of how he killed Rachel.
What details did he provide that were not part of the media coverage, that were not available to the public?
I mean, I guess picking her up and killing her with a hammer and dropping her off at Matagorda Bay. I don't know. I'm giving you what I have.
No, I know, but it just seems to me like he's just making shit up so that he can get out of his cell for a bit, become connected to a major case, to, I don't know, mess with his sentencing or try to get deals out of it.
Authorities pursued this lead with a great intensity, and they started to develop a case against him. They took him to the locations he had described. They traveled with Moore to Matagorda Bay, where he claimed to have dumped Rachel's body. Alas, they found nothing. Still, Moore and his attorneys entered into negotiations. A deal was struck. Moore would plead guilty to Rachel's murder. In return, he would receive just 18 additional months added to his current sentence. For the Cooke family, this appeared to be a moment they had been waiting for, an answer, an end to years of anguish and speculation. And with optimism, they gathered alongside their friends and family in a packed courtroom at the Williamson County Courthouse for the hearing. It was November 9th, 2006, and at this point Rachel had been missing for nearly 5 years. The media coverage was insane. The courtroom overflowed with reporters, supporters, spectators, everyone anticipating closure. Then
he pleaded not guilty.
Moore stood to enter his plea, and he said,
"Motherfucker,
not guilty." A hush.
And the added bonus is he probably did commit some crime at Matagorda Bay. And so getting them to take him there got him out of his cell, got him out of prison, but also got to take him somewhere where he could relive a crime that he committed.
Yeah.
And then he was fucking with everybody. And then he goes back and he says not guilty. And now he's associated with this famous case. And now he's gotten a lot of things that he wanted out of it.
There's footage from the courtroom, and you can see the judge's face when he says not guilty, and the judge is like, "Excuse me?" And he says not guilty, and you can see his attorneys are like, "What the fuck?" What is going on? What do you mean not guilty?
I did not remember this part of this. I'm not recalling things. Because I know that it's still unsolved, and I do technically have a degree in psychology with a concentration in forensics, and it just seems like it's out of a playbook, really. Yeah.
A hush befell the courtroom, and the turnabout sparked immediate confusion, not just for people in the audience, but among Moore's own legal team, who up to that moment had fully expected him to plead guilty. And once again, the Cooke family was victimized. Once again, the Cooke family was devastated.
Yep, that's the other thing. Now he has more victims to add to his plate.
Reopening the Cooke family to a trauma, a pain that they had been cautiously preparing to bury. After the hearing, Moore spoke to a reporter and admitted that he had fabricated the entire story. He had preyed on the Cooke's family's grief and suffering. The district attorney publicly announced plans to pursue charges against Moore, but without a confession or any supporting evidence, a grand jury was never convened and there was no case. As of 2011, Michael Moore remained a person of interest in the eyes of the Williamson County Sheriff's Office. By that time, Williamson County divers had searched Lake Georgetown on 4 separate occasions, and each time they came up empty. Still, investigators continued working the case. Both Detective Larry Hawkins and former Texas Ranger Matthew Lindeman were still actively following leads into 2011, and as Detective Hawkins put it, eliminate everything, because one day you will have a legitimate tip. Some tips led law enforcement to a specific property in Williamson County. They don't say what property. I couldn't seem to find an answer to that. That's fine. That's whatever. They used ground penetrating radar to look for disturbed soil or any signs that someone might have been buried there. That property had been the subject of multiple reports. Like, multiple tips have been called in related to this property. So much so that Hawkins refers to it as a, quote, continuous tip, returning time and time again. As of 2024, nothing ever came of this continuous tip with this property, and it's been searched, excavated many times. Meanwhile, Rachel's family is still trying to live. Janet, still seeking answers, remained especially fixated on understanding not just what happened, but why. Janet has the hardest time grappling with why someone would disappear or harm her daughter. She lives alone, surrounded by her art, and was still teaching at Georgetown High School years ago, but she may have retired at this point. One of the things that I really loved about Janet was part of her coping was rescuing a dog from Hurricane Katrina and building a koi pond herself in her yard, doing all of these things to ground her in the present despite the horrible things happening around her and in her past. She still wonders if Michael Moore might be involved with her daughter's disappearance. On January 27th, 2011, Moore agreed to speak about Rachel's case for the show Disappeared. A camera was set up inside the prison chapel, and Moore appeared just to say that he had changed his mind, much like he had done before. And once again, Rachel's family was left confused and hurt.
He just likes fucking with people.
He does. He's a predator. He is a fucking predator.
So stop letting him. Just let him sit and rot where he's at.
As of 2011, and this is the last update I have on Joanne, she was working towards getting her Master's of Science in Social Work from the University of Texas at Austin, and her ultimate goal was to help families struggling with issues like hers, but also to hopefully find individuals like the one who took her sister and help them before they make decisions like what they did with Rachel. Robert Cooke was never able to move beyond trying to find his daughter, and ultimately he died in 2014 without any kind of resolution to his daughter's case. Years continued to pass. The weight of Robert's death hung heavy over Janet Cooke and Joanne. And Janet's quoted as saying, "Not only do I miss him, but then I miss the fact that he did a lot of the work, to be honest with you, simply because I emotionally couldn't handle it. But I have vowed to keep fighting, and we're going to do it. We're going to keep on going." And that's what Janet has done since. In January 2016, Janet and Joanne and their extended family gathered for the 14th anniversary remembrance of Rachel's disappearance, sharing stories of Rachel clinging to hope and trying to publicly renew their commitment to the search. The community, too, refused to forget. The case remained etched in the collective memory of Georgetown and Williamson County, as Sheriff Mike Gleason, who had been involved since the beginning, noted years later. There's something about this case that the community is just so enthralled that they want closure. That community support, which had manifested in massive volunteer searches in the early days, continued to buoy the family's spirits. Rachel's aunt, Ellen Hettenhausen, it's gotta be something German, right?
Sure is.
Recalled people in the community who heard Rachel disappeared. They didn't know her, they didn't know us, but they came and helped search day after day. But hope needed more than just community support. And in 2017, a new significant shift occurred within the Williamson County Sheriff's Office under the leadership of newly elected Sheriff Robert Chody. Chody?
Yeah.
Chody. Chody? Sorry, Sheriff Robert Chody.
I'm sorry, we're not mature enough for this.
We're going to give Chody the respect he deserves because he established a cold case unit for the Williamson County Sheriff's Department.
County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah. Is that wrong?
Well, you say Wilson sometimes and you say William sometimes, but it's Williamson.
Oh, did I just say William?
Yeah.
Oh, Williamson. This specialized unit comprised experienced investigators, some with state backgrounds, some with federal, and they took over the Rachel Cooke investigation, along with 10 other unsolved crimes in the county. The FBI's collaboration also appeared to intensify, and Janet Cooke expressed cautious optimism with the renewed focus. These guys are really working. They're digging up anything they can, and they're finding things because they're going through the footwork. The formation of this unit wasn't just bureaucratic shuffling, it really did signal new commitment and a strategic decision to dedicate focused resources to Williamson County's most persistent mysteries. Almost immediately, this unit started to act on tips, and in June of 2017, investigators descended on an area near Liberty Hill. Mm-hmm. So, near Liberty Hill, close to the North Fork of the San Gabriel River, a tipster had specifically mentioned Rachel Cooke's name, suggesting that her remains were buried there. 4 cadaver dogs reportedly alerted to the scent of human remains in a specific 18 by 20 foot area, prompting excavation. Hopes rose only to be dashed again. After hours, possibly days of digging, the search was called off. Nothing was found. Another frustrating dead end. But the cold case unit was just getting started, and their next major lead generated headlines across Texas and beyond. Fast forward to April 2018, 16 years post Rachel's vanishment. The Williamson County Cold Case Unit, acting on a tip they had received, located a vehicle in the Dallas area. It wasn't just any vehicle, it was a white 1998 Pontiac Trans Am. This was significant because back in 2002, witnesses had reported seeing a similar car, a white Camaro. But I don't know what exactly transpired that Trans Am became a part of the conversation, but that was a big deal.
Maybe they just looked similar.
They
and if the Trans Am was a new model, then looking at the Trans Am, they might have assumed that they were looking at a Camaro without seeing that it was a Trans Am.
Yeah, exactly. And now investigators had found this white Trans Am. Sheriff Robert Chody announced that this specific car was tied to 3 or 4 individuals already identified as persons of interest in Rachel's case. This car was carefully transported back to Williamson County.
Do we get their names?
No. Sorry. Sorry. Where FBI forensics experts prepared to analyze every inch, Chody called it a significant piece of evidence that could make or break the case. District Attorney Sean Dick, Chody and Dick.
Stop, I can't get this eye to stop watering as it is, and when you make me laugh, it gets worse.
DA Dick echoed the sentiment, calling it the most tangible piece of evidence they had.
These guys, they shouldn't have gone into any sort of industry where they would have gone by their last name. They should have gone into drug dealing. Like, you don't have to exchange names. I think they actually suggest, they discourage you from doing so.
Janet Cooke was briefed by investigators, and she remembers feeling dumbfounded and a sense of extreme elation that was born out of years of disappointment. Janet had a lot of faith that this lead would prove to be the lead that ends the case. Investigators planned to use every tool at their disposal. They even used newly acquired tech called the M-VAC system, or M-VAC system. This wet vacuum device was designed to lift microscopic traces of DNA, like skin cells, hair, touch DNA, from porous or aged surfaces where traditional methods might fail. Detective Jason Cox, I did not recognize this as I was working through this.
It's not until you said Chody, Dick, and Cox aloud.
Because all of this comes from articles. Like 2011 is where Disappeared stops. So I'm just sitting here like,
yeah, when you're not saying it aloud, you don't necessarily notice it.
He expressed hope. It's a more thorough system, and it'll open doors for us that previously weren't open. As tech catches up to the case, it makes it a lot more interesting for us because it keeps us moving forward and gives us leads that we would have not had prior. Months passed as this painstaking analysis continued, and in September 2018, the sheriff's office released a preliminary update. Tests indicated the possible presence of blood on an item on the passenger floorboard and on the passenger door molding of the Trans Am. This ignited a fresh new wave of hope. Could this be it? The physical link, the forensic proof that had been missing for so long. But forensic science, especially on evidence over 16 years old, is complex. Further testing was needed, more time passed, and the initial excitement surrounding the Trans Am began to temper. And then the update no one wanted to hear. Despite the intensive investigation, the advanced tech, the initial promising signs, ultimately, investigators had to concede. No evidence definitively linking the white Trans Am to Rachel Cooke was found. The lead, once held as potentially case-breaking, had grown cold. It was another gut-wrenching turn in a case full of them. But the cold case unit and Rachel's family pressed on. And even without a breakthrough from the Trans Am, the investigation did not stop. The Williamson County Sheriff's Office and the FBI continued to work the case, emphasizing that it remained active and a priority. Public awareness remained key. In May of 2019, 2019, for what would have been Rachel's 37th birthday, the FBI placed billboards along the busy I-35 corridor. Rachel's smiling face looked out bearing the message, "Missing but not forgotten." Janet Cooke saw it as a poignant Mother's Day gift, hoping it might trigger a memory for someone passing through. The reward for information leading to Rachel's location remained substantial and was upped from $50,000 to $100,000. In January 2020, marking the 18th anniversary, the Cold Case Unit released another potential tool to jog public memory. They released 2 new digitally rendered sketches of persons of interest. A forensic artist had created these updated images after re-interviewing witnesses from 2002. And Detective Cox stated at the time, "Whoever's responsible, I never want them to feel any comfort. I want them to know we're going to work this every single day until we come up with a resolution for the family." In August 2020, investigators publicly asked for a particular individual who had called in a tip the previous month to contact them again for follow-up questions. Then in 2021, and again in early 2024, the sheriff's office announced they were seeking information about or contact with a specific man known to have been an associate of Rachel's back in Georgetown in 2002. This man was believed to possibly be involved in the local cattle or horse industry and had reportedly been talking about the case. Was this a sign that investigators were circling back to Rachel's known connections from that time? I don't know. On January 10th, 2022, 20 years, 2 decades since Rachel Cooke went for a run and vanished just yards from her home, friends, family, and community members and law enforcement gathered once again to remember Rachel. Sheriff Mike Gleason confirmed that tips still came in daily, totaling over 2,000 by this point. He acknowledged the challenge. "We really get phone calls every day from people saying, she dated this one guy in high school and he was kind of a creeper. Whether it's true or not, you still have to discount that person." 2 more years passed, and in January 2024, 22 years after Rachel's disappearance, Rachel would now be 41 years old. Detective Mark McKinney, who oversees the Williamson County Sheriff's Office now, reiterated the department's commitment. "I want people to know that we're working on this. It's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. There's a team of us down here that do nothing but this. We do it every day, full time." McKinney acknowledged the hurdles, the lack of witnesses, the less advanced tech of 2002, but he also expresses a cautious optimism, stating the case was further along now, just waiting for one crucial piece of information. "We just need the right piece of information, maybe to tie some things together. I personally think that this case will be solved eventually. I think that, with the information we have and with the information we're likely to get, I do think that eventually we'll have an answer." For Janet Cooke, the passage of 22 years hasn't diminished the pain, but her focus remains clear. What's done is done. We can't change that. The damage psychologically for my family can't be brought back. I could go on with the truth and whoever did it. Maybe the truth coming out would make a difference in their life. The search continues, the hope endures, and the belief persists that someone, somewhere, holds the key, the single piece of information needed to finally bring Rachel Cooke home and end more than 2 decades of agonizing uncertainty for her family and community. Anyone with information regarding the disappearance of Rachel Louise Cooke is urged to contact the Williamson County Sheriff's Office at 512-943-5204. They can also reach out to the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or 225-5324. You can also submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. A reward of up to $100,000 has been publicized for information leading to Rachel's location, and that's the case, as I know it, of Rachel Louise Cooke.
These are baffling, where these young women like Rachel Cooke and Maura Murray are they're there one second and they're gone the next, and there are no answers. Yeah. None. Decades later, no answers.
It's weird to think that something like this can happen and no one sees it.
Right.
No one knows. And I know that the hope, right? I know that the thread that continues to pull us through these situations is that somebody saw something. Mm-hmm. Somebody knows something. Mm-hmm. And it's so critically important. As much as I like to believe in magic, people don't disappear into thin air. They don't just vanish. They don't shimmer into a different dimension.
It really downplays the situation when that is the phrase that's used, that they vanished into thin thin air. No, they didn't.
Yeah.
Something happened to them. Someone happened to them.
Someone harmed her. Someone who knows? I don't know.
Or continues to harm her.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
But where is she?
Yeah. Where is Rachel Louise Cooke or her remains? I don't know. I don't think they're in Matagorda Bay. I don't think they're in Lake Georgetown. But where they are, I have no idea. You know, if that area is as rural as it's described, she could be anywhere.
Well, and if it was as rural in 2002 as it probably was, it's probably been built over quite a bit.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, she could be buried somewhere where they've
Deep
put
under
up
a
businesses
business.
or homes.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Park. I mean,
That makes it all the more terrifying.
yeah. I wonder if there's any process or procedure in place before an area is developed.
I bet
where
not.
Yeah, probably
They're not doing ground penetrating radar.
Well, they should, just in case. Even if only 1 in a million times do they find something.
Yeah. This is a case that it hurts my stomach to say it. I'm not hopeful at this point in time, but that doesn't mean I don't think it can be solved, which I think it
Right.
is so important that if you do know anything and you happen to hear this podcast, you make your tip.
You're not as young as you were back then with the same people that you might have feared or the same lack of maturity that you might have had. If you know something, you need to say something.
Rachel Cooke and her family deserve more.
The community, the Georgetown community deserves more. A complete list of sources and any links can be found in the show notes.
And that's all we have for this episode. If you enjoyed listening and want to hear more, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a review.
Recommend us to a friend, and if you're able and willing to help us produce this podcast, sign up for our Patreon.
The link to joining our supportive bestie tier for only $2 a month is listed in the show notes. Also, make sure you're following us at End of Crime Pod on Instagram.
Our email address is endofcrimepod@gmail.com, so feel free to reach out with questions or episode suggestions.
Thank you for listening.
Until the next crime.